He refers to studies by Neilson and explains that the cause of stuttering to be found by studying the cortical process that anticipates speech production. Their view of stuttering is of an interference or disturbance within the sensoric motoric process. Yeah, and that's between the motor pattern and the sensory feedback of this motoric pattern. Yeah, and at that time there were two current theories. The centralist that proposed that speech production was governed by an open loop, pre-programmed control. On the other hand, the peripheralist that meant that the speech production were executed through a closed loop feedback control. Yeah, and Neilson, he suggested that the probability that both these occurrences of open loop and closed loop control mechanisms cooperates in a hierarchic system with many levels of open and closed loop control mechanisms for the government speech production. Now, you mean what relevance it has to stuttering? You see, the conclusion of Neilson concerning stuttering was that a person who stutters has a limited capacity to handle the coordination between the motor activity and the sensory reafferent activity that happens during speech. Yeah, and as a consequence, the person who stutters have to have some extra training in coordinating the motoric pattern with the sensory feedback system, or use extra efforts on cost of other functions. Yeah, okay, yeah. That's interesting, yeah, I do agree, yeah. But what she could mean, Neilson, of other functions are not clearly mentioned, but one could think of extra emotional overload, problems, feelings due to stutter, and concentration of talking, analyzing those feelings. But I'm sure of that. I'm not sure of that, no. Yeah, and you saw these old quotation by David Ingvar. Yeah, and yeah, I think you can use it in this context. Yes. Yeah, but the conclusion from Andrews et al. Of their vast literature review was in favor of Neilson's hypothesis, because they found this dysfunction of the brain process as an inherited pattern of the organization of brain functions. And this could also explain the other research findings they recognize in their systematized literature review. Yeah, and for instance, the delayed onset of voicing, poor results on tests measuring the functions of the central auditory system. And these are, the studies with poor results by people who stutter on dichotic listening, and delayed language development, and the presence of articulatory difficulties as a result of deficiency of processing capacity of the cerebral cortex. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And and you think why Andrews and his colleagues could explain why most children recover spontaneously. Well, yeah, what he explains is that some children with heredity for stutter or with a recent onset of stutter are able to find different strategies for compensating to these disfluencies and therefore recover. Oh yeah, okay. And the differences between boys and girls regarding stuttering. Yeah, if they found any cortical explanations to why this difference. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, there are explanations to this. The inheritance of stutter by gender, as you know, 3 or 4 times more boys than girls that stutter. They found some scientific proof that girls, as different with boys, are able to process linguistic material in both the hemispheres, and this provides to them an extra protection against development of stutter. And this can explain why girls more often recover from stutter faster and more efficiently than boys. Okay, what the reasons are, according to them, that children start to stutter. Whether they develop stutter depends on the capacity of the brain to control the switches between the motor, the efferent, and the sensory patterns, the afferent patterns. And these are the demands for being able to produce the gentle motoric patterns necessary for fluent speech. Yeah, and this could explain both recoveries from stutter when the sensory motoric skills of coordination have developed. And furthermore, it could explain why you stutter more frequently at the beginning of an utterance or sentence, the moment where the control of speech is more difficult to keep. Yeah. Okay, and and when it's easiest to keep. Yeah, and that's under the conditions where the motoric speech pattern is easier to control. And this could, for instance, be during the choral reading, repetition of someone talking, and the imitation, and also during singing. Yeah, and you're singing as well. When we're working when we are singing in choir, for example, they have the pulse, you have the rhythm, you have the timing, you have the rate, and also there is during prolonged speech. Yeah. And and these conditions, they create a minimum of needs for control, probably both of the linguistic level and the prosodic level. Yeah, and as you know, the different lengths of speech sounds, the accent, the pulse, and the intonation of different languages. Yeah, and that's right. Yeah, and you probably remember it from your lessons in phonetics during the education. Yeah. And one is interesting thing that you can test for yourself. If you repeat what you have said, you are strengthening a motoric pattern. Yeah, and that is why it facilitates for you to take control over your speech. Yeah, and that's very beneficial. Oh yeah, and how this could be related to the right or the left hemisphere? Yeah, and that's your question. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's no easy explanations to this, as there are some main groups of theories, and and they are in different ways talking of these facilitators, fluency easiest to keep. Some are like Orton and Travis, relating to the causal mechanism of stuttering through the cerebral cortex and the conflict between the left and the right hemispheres controlling the control of speech. Yeah. But you see, there are others that claim that the interference from the right hemisphere should not cause the stutter, but instead partly compensates from stutter. Yeah. And this approach in theory focuses on the basal ganglia, you know, the structures situated in the midbrain with the conjunctive structures such as the supplementary motor areas, the SMA, and the primary functions of the supplementary motor areas, and they appears to be control of sequential movements and speech production. And you see the speech production, we can see it as a prime example for a sequential movement. And the supplementary area now appears to be the principal cortical structure in a neural network that initiates speech. And the cerebellum, it plays an important role in the synergy of rapid auditory movements and the fine coordination of muscles. And this suggests that the cerebellum provides the specialized, rapid and precise motor control that's needed for ongoing connected speech. And an interesting thing that inside the cerebellum there are both afferent and efferent feedback circuits that makes the cerebellum capable of ensuring a desired level of neural activity in the motor parts of the nervous system. The basal ganglia